We are joined now by the voice of the Lions, Dan Miller, on the D&M Leasing Hotline. Once again, back on the show. Good morning, Dan. How are you?
Hey guys, doing well. Good morning.
Are you just as invested in the Tigers right now as the Lions?
It's been pretty unbelievable just watching what's happened because nobody saw this coming after they sold at the deadline and were pretty much left for dead, and everybody was just looking to the off season, and then all of a sudden these guys just started pitching like crazy, hitting when they had to, and just kept winning and found their way into the playoffs, and now they're hot, and who knows what the limit is for these guys. But yeah, it's been in a town that's been starved for some success in baseball. It's been fantastic.
Dan, pretend I've never watched football before, as Jason Garrett once accused us of. And tell me what happened in the last 5 minutes of last year's Cowboys-Lions game. If you could just recap that for me.
So before the game, the Lions had told the officials that they were going to run this play, and they were going to send two guys over to report. One of them was going to report, and one of them was not. Taylor Decker was going to report. Skipper was not. My understanding is that Brad Allen then wanted to clarify before the game because he was not in that initial meeting, and he went and sought out Dan Campbell, and Dan Campbell explained to him exactly what was going to happen. And they did what they said they were going to do. Unfortunately, things went sideways when Brad Allen then announced to the crowd that Dan Skipper had reported. And at that point, I don't even know what you do. You could have called a timeout maybe. I don't even know if they had any left, or I don't remember what the situation was. But everything just went sideways after that. They obviously threw it to Decker. He had announced Skipper is reporting, even though in the Lions' minds it was Decker that had reported. And then they get the two-point conversion. Two-point conversion is taken away, and Campbell goes nuts, basically saying, I told you exactly what we were going to do, and we did exactly what we said we were going to do, and you didn't do it right. And that's kind of where it is. I think it was just a situation where the Lions felt like they did everything that they were supposed to do. Was there a little bit of gamesmanship in there? Yeah, there was. Did that confuse Brad Allen? You could say obviously it did. So, I mean, that's what it was. And once he announced Skipper, you're kind of losing the high ground there. There's not a whole lot you can do because things have fallen off the rails at that point because you're throwing it to a different guy.
Yeah. Now, Dan, we've had two people come on this week and say that Dan Campbell will seek revenge for that by definitely doing something tricky and maybe even throwing to a Lions offensive lineman on Sunday. Is that in Dan Campbell's DNA? Will you be the third to think?
You know what's in his DNA is to win this game. I mean, last time out they beat Seattle. Seattle had beaten Dan Campbell's teams in each of the first 3 years he was head coach. They've been to Dallas the last 2 years, and they've lost tough games. I mean, even if you go back to that game in 2022, first series of the fourth quarter, the Lions have the ball at the 1 yard line with a chance to go in and take the lead, and Jamal Williams fumbles. So I think they felt like they've had two very winnable games down in Dallas that they have let get away. And that's the kind of stuff that bothers Dan Campbell. Now, look, part of his DNA is just that he does stuff like that. He will fake punts, and he will, at times, we don't really see him go for two a ton, to be honest with you. It's more the fake punts and going for it on fourth down and things like that. So, maybe there's something in their bag of tricks that they try to pull out. I don't know. But they just want to win this game. They're coming off a game against Seattle in which they played their best offensive game of the year. I know they want to keep that going. And they've had some ups and downs this season. So I'd say chief among his objectives going down there is to win and trying to get his guys to get back to playing a full football game. But, obviously there's been a lot of talk about that this week. But guys aren't really buying into it. They just kind of moved on. And heck, we're chasing Minnesota. They're 5-0. Every team in our division's got a winning record, so we got enough to worry about right now.
Lions play-by-play, Dan Miller joined us here at 105 through the Fan. All right, so Campbell last year, I know he got killed by the national media, a lot of them, for the NFC Championship game being too aggressive. He's always been aggressive. Is he still as aggressive on fourth down as he was last year?
We've seen some of that. I think this and I know, look, I'm closer to it than a lot of people, and a lot of people kind of dip in and see what happens, and then they want to judgment on that moment alone. If you go back to last year in the playoffs, they had a fourth down where they scored a touchdown against the Rams. They had a fourth down where they scored a touchdown against the Bucks. They threw the ball with 2 minutes to go, and a lot of teams would just run it against L.A. in the playoffs to ice that game. He trusts his offense, and that's really what it comes down to in these situations. And sometimes does that go against conventional wisdom? Yeah, sometimes it probably does. But I would also submit that, Josh Reynolds, who was a heck of a player when he was here, there's 2 passes on fourth down that if he catches, they've got a much better chance of winning that football game. And normally those were plays that he makes, in particular the fourth down when they were in plus territory. So, look, back to kind of the question I was asked earlier, that fourth down thing is in his DNA. And the reason that it is because of the units on this team. He trusts that offense more than any other to go out there, win a game, ice a game, or put him in position to win a game. And I think that's where those fourth down gambles come from.
Dan, is this Lions team better than last year's? And if so, how much better?
It's not yet. And I think where it potentially will be better is defensively. They're starting to get their guys back. Their secondary is pretty much brand new. And you have one guy playing the same position he played last year. Brian Branch has moved to safety from nickel corner. You have new corners and a new nickel. And basically during camp, one of those guys was always hurt. So they didn't get much time on task. So those guys need to play together and figure things out together. And that really hasn't happened yet. I mean, if you go back and look at that Seattle game where they gave up 500 runs, 500, I got Tigers on my mind, 500 yards passing, 500 yards. Man, they were so close to getting to Geno Smith so many times, but hat tip to him, man. He played a heck of a game. So I think the defense is potentially where they become a better team than they were last year. And I think that's, I would even say, likely, but it hasn't happened yet. It's got to gel. They've got to figure some things out. They're still really good against the run. They were good against the run last year, and that's really where it starts with them. But offensively, look, a lot of the same faces, a lot of the same explosiveness. It really hadn't come together before the Seattle game. You're hoping that it kind of takes off now. But to me, where they had to get better was defensively. I see the pieces there. They just got to figure it out.
Dan, is the offensive explosion and the offense's chances of being better this year than last, does it hinge on Jameson Williams and his breakout?
That's a lot of it. Yeah, I think that's fair. JMO is, as Jared Goff said to me a couple weeks ago, he's a one-play touchdown guy. I mean, you can get the ball to him anywhere on the field, and if he's got an angle on somebody, he's going to score because you just can't catch him. He's incredibly fast. His speed is something else, and we have seen him run by, corners time after time after time, and there have been times where Jared's missed him. There have been times where he's dropped the ball, but things have seemed to come together for him this year where he looks a lot more comfortable. His route tree has grown. If you look at that play that he made against Seattle, a little crossing route, and he turns that thing into, a 70-yard touchdown. And that's what you kind of felt like he had the ability to do all along. But, look, first year he came in, he was coming off an ACL. Second year he came in, he was suspended. So it's just been – this year he could just think about football. It wasn't all the other stuff where he had to figure out how to get back into football after being out for a while. So I think that has paid off. I think his mental approach to the game has changed significantly, and just the way he conducts himself as a professional has improved significantly. So, yeah, I mean, he's got the talent to completely change this offense, in one play and certainly for a season with his abilities.
Lions play-by-play voice Dan Miller joining us here on 105 Through the Fan. Okay, Dan, so you talk about the improvements on defense that Detroit sought out this past offseason. They're playing a lot more man coverage this year. That's something where CeeDee Lamb has typically had a lot of success. Do you expect that trend to continue this week, or do you think that the Lions will say, hey, let's kind of settle back down into some of these zone coverages and make sure that we're not just letting CeeDee Lamb beat our guys one-on-one?
Yeah, good question, and it's a new cast this year to see how they would want to handle that. I will say this. Obviously, he had a huge game against the Lions last year. That's the defense that Aaron Glenn wants to play. And he was forced to play a lot of zone because he didn't have the talent to play man-to-man for his first 3 years here. And I think he feels like he's got some guys that can match up between Carlton Davis, Terry Arnold is a rookie. I think he's got a lot of talent, but he's also got a lot of penalties right now because he's figuring out how much you can use your hands and how physically you can be in this league. So I would imagine you're going to see a mix of both, but I would imagine you're going to see a significant amount of man-to-man, maybe with some safety help over the top. But I think that a lot of it's going to hinge on how quickly they can get to Dak Prescott and if they can make him get the ball out a little quicker than he has in the past. But it's an evolving thing with Aaron Glenn week to week where he will change. But what he ultimately wants to do is allow his guys to play man-to-man so he can maximize what he can do up front. And I think you bring up a great question. How do they handle a great receiver who torched them last year? I think that's going to be interesting to watch. But my guess would be they're going to try to use quite a bit of man-to-man.
Given the success of Detroit's running game and some of the struggles that Dallas's run defense has had this season, over/under in this one for Detroit, 40 rush attempts. Is that too much?
I'd say probably, depending upon, as long as the scoreboard isn't kind of tilted against them and they're throwing the ball, I would say that's probably right where they want to be. It's the strength of this team. It is what this team is built around, that offensive line. That offensive line, for all the guys that we've talked about, that offensive line is the face of this team. And Frank Ragnow should be back for this one. He missed the last game they played against Seattle. And I think once he's in there and you've got those two running backs, you feel like that's the way you can control the game, and then you can pass the ball off of that. So, yeah, I think they'll try to see if that thing's there. If it is, I think they'll keep going back to it. But they're going to throw it too. I mean, they want to get the ball to Amon-Ra St. Brown. They want to get the ball to J-Mo. They want to get the ball to Laporta, who's had a bit of a slow start and some injuries to deal with. But they want to get the ball to those guys and be balanced. But at its core, they love grinding it out with David Montgomery, and they love grinding it out with Jahmyr Gibbs. And the thing about those guys is it's not just, 4 yards, 4 yards, 4 yards. Those guys are perfectly capable of breaking 20, 40, 50 yards, whatever is there. They have that kind of explosiveness. And they feel like if you keep leaning on somebody and keep cracking at it, you're going to find one.
Dan, we had a guest on yesterday, a Lions super fan that works up here, said that Jared Goff is going to go down as the best Lions quarterback ever. Do you buy that?
Well, I mean, let's say this. He has done things that we hadn't seen a quarterback do around here since the 50s, and that's win 2 playoff games. They'd actually never won 2 playoff games in a year because back then you only had to win one. But they, it depends on what happens from here. I mean, look, I think Matthew Stafford is ultimately, with his Super Bowl, he's going to be in the top 10 of every category. He's going to go into the Hall of Fame probably at some point. I think Goff's story is still being written. I mean, he just signed an extension, and if they have the kind of success that they believe that they can have, look, if he gets to a Super Bowl or wins a Super Bowl, yeah, he'll be the greatest Lions quarterback since Bobby Lane. So I just think it depends on what happens from here. I don't think it's an outrageous statement, but I think it's a statement that is still being, looked at and studied, and we don't know what the end result's going to be because so much of his resume at this point is incomplete. But, what he did last year, bringing playoff football back to Detroit, winning 2 games, getting to the NFC Championship, that's stuff we hadn't seen around here in a long time. And certainly he's got a lot of football in front of him where he can improve on that.
Dan Miller, Lions play-by-play here on 105.3 The Fan. How is the team and the fan base handling maybe being a target? And do you think that the Lions should be viewed as the NFC favorite right now?
I think you can make the case that in some ways they were a target last year. They won 8 out of 10 to close 22 and almost made the playoffs, lost out in the last hour of basically week 18. And I think they went into last season as the NFC North favorite. So there were a lot of people coming after them last year. I think this year, certainly, it's even more so. And I think they've handled it fine. Look, they're a good team.
Yeah.
And, I know sometimes people look at schedules or how people view them, things like that. In my mind, look, good teams find a way to win 10 or 11 games, and bad teams find a way to lose 10 or 11 games. So if they play their game, do the things they're capable of doing, stick to their recipe, which, like a lot of teams, is not turning it over, maximizing their possessions, and find a way to kind of get that defense to kick it gear against the pass a little bit. They're going to be in that 10-12 win range and have a shot at winning the NFC North, which is seemingly getting tougher every week. And they'll be able to handle the teams that give them their best shot, because that's what good teams do. I mean, good teams understand they're going to get that. Buffalo knows they're going to get that, and Kansas City knows they're going to get that, and Baltimore and Pittsburgh, teams that are good every year, know they're going to get that. And, you guys have been through that yourselves. So if you're good, that doesn't bother you. That doesn't become a reason you're not where you want to be at the end of the year. It's that you didn't play well enough. So I honestly believe they'll be able to handle that. And this team under Dan Campbell, whatever happens to them, they don't stay down for long. They haven't lost 2 games in a row since October of 2022. That's the longest streak in the NFL. And that's because he's got a real ability to just get this team ready to play each time out. And I think that's kind of the secret sauce for them, is just his way of setting the tone with them. And I think they're usually ready for what's in front of them.
Now I will reverse things and ask you, how much better, worse, or the same do you think these Cowboys are compared to last year?
Well, I mean, obviously they're beat up. I mean, that's one thing with their defensive line. But I'll tell you, watching the game the other night, you got some guys up there that are still playing like crazy. And the last 2 games, they've been very good against the run. So I think that there's some good things happening there. Looks like you're getting maybe Bland back in the secondary, which is significant. And Dax, CD, the running attack that I know they'd like to have maybe hasn't materialized yet, but Dowdle certainly looks like, he might be a hard-running guy that can give you something in that regard. And, I'm watching the other night, and you're starting to move the ball around. Nine's getting involved on offense now, on end arounds and throwing in the ball, and Tolbert's getting ready. So I see a team that, is figuring out what to do with what they've got. And it looks like it's getting stronger and better to me. That was a really nice win the other night that you could build off of. So, look, when you lose somebody like a Parsons or a Lawrence, that's massive, man. I mean, those are game-changing players in this league, and that's hard to overcome. But I'm not seeing a blink. I'm seeing them, bounce right back and find a way to get a win on the road, which is never easy in this league. So I think they're going to be right there. And much like the Lions, they're looking at the division. They see what Washington's doing, and they know they have to keep pace. So I anticipate a veteran team that's going to play this game like they've got to win it, and to have a heck of a game on Sunday.